Hello, my name's Jeff Berino. I'm Chief of Summit Fire and EMS here in Summit County. The audience is 0 today, so I have good social distance to the camera, so I'm going to do this without a mask so you can see my smiling face. We're here today to talk about wildfire investigations. A lot of people find that fascinating. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to it, so please bear with me. We've had several wildfires here in the county, and I have the luxury of investigating wildfires across the United States through a second job, Advanced Fire, where I work for attorneys and insurance companies, and in some cases the Forest Service and BLM to help identify causes of a wildfire. With a wildfire, we look at and we see burnt out woods, charred trees, black rocks, and people say, what do you look for? It's a matter of taking the pieces of the puzzle and putting them together. And fire not only destroys evidence, but it creates evidence. So with that, let's take a look at the problem. This is kind of fascinating. We average about 50,000 wildfires, reported wildfires a year in the country. The acreage burned goes from anywhere from 3 to 10 million acres per year. We've all heard about mega fires that are getting big, over a couple 100,000 acres, and they're getting more severe. I investigated the Bastrop fire that just settled out of court, where we lost over 1,600 homes in the first day and a half. And I also participated in the investigation on the Camp Fire out in California, where unfortunately over 80 lives were lost in that first several hours of the fire. So the problem is significant, and we are not immune to it here in Summit County. Let's take a look at what fires cost. First of all, direct loss. A big fire costs us as taxpayers upwards of $1 million a day to fight when we have a big campaign fire, if you will. But other items fall into play. Look at what could happen to Summit County with a devastating wildfire. Lack of tourism. If we took out a ski area or several subdivisions, or the scare we had a few years ago at the Buffalo Fire that threatened wilderness in the town of Silverthorne. Not so much up here in Summit, but elsewhere, timber sales, logging is big bucks, agriculture is big bucks, and in some areas, I've done a lot of fire investigation in Texas, Oklahoma, where pump jacks and oil storage batteries have been destroyed. That mineral loss is huge, and we all know we are the watershed for a good portion of Colorado in the western United States. So the problem is significant, and finding the cause of these fires is equally as important. Like any investigation, criminal, civil, structure fire, wildfire, there's always obstructions. This is a real picture, by the way. I was out in eastern Colorado, in my tiny Toyota Tacoma, trying to find this fire in eastern Colorado. That was fun. And this critter would not leave, so I had to, even honking the horn didn't work, so I yielded to the right-of-way. But the obstructions are significant: time, money, and as time goes on, some of the evidence disappears. So there are obstructions in our business, and we'll talk about them. Something that scares me is we're starting to see this in other parts of the world. Summit County, knock on wood, we've been lucky, but some militant groups have seen fire. It's been used since biblical times, where people have used fire as a weapon, shooting the catapults with the flaming balls over the castles, and there has been some talk about some militant groups using fire to create economic havoc and political havoc here in the United States. So let's hope that does not materialize. I thought this was a fun picture. This is a house in Minnesota. Yes, there are wildfires in Minnesota, and I've never seen a house melt. But when we talk at D-Space, just like Dan Schroeder advocates and Steve Lipscher all the time, plastic homes are especially vulnerable here. This is vinyl, and you can see they had a little bit of a problem. So when we talk about structural hardening in the mitigation in the WUI area, please pay attention. This is not good for Summit County. I like this picture because it hits home. This was from the Waldo Canyon fire, Mountain Shadows subdivision. look at this, fairly good D-space around homes. But then why did the fire spare 3 homes? Was it because there was a fire engine parked here in the driveway? We don't know, but the fire does not know what it's supposed to do, where it's supposed to go. I fought the Yellowstone fires, which were several million acres. That was in 1988. And in the middle of 1 million acres of burnt land was 5 acres that was untouched. So the fire does not know what it's supposed to do. And as we trace it back to its origin, that's where it gets fascinating. Now, here's some lessons. Please pay attention to this. Test question on this later on. 3 things that drive a wildfire, and they help us as investigators. Number 1 is wind. That's one of the first things firefighters look at when they're fighting a wildfire. And as a fire investigator, I also look, what was the wind doing when that fire started? How do we find out what it was doing? Talk to people, interviews, weather stations, observations, video cameras, and eyewitnesses. So wind is the primary driver of where a wildfire is going to go. Secondly, we look at topography. Is Summit County flat? No. Fire tends to burn, test question, uphill or downhill? I know you can't answer me, so I'll answer for you. Fires tend to want to burn uphill at a faster rate. So we have to look at the influences of topography. And finally, the influence of fuel packages. Where is it more tightly or densely packaged as opposed to lighter fuel groups like grass? Fire will behave differently with different fuel packages. And one area that concerns a lot of us here in Summit County, is we've talked about it at Healthy Forest Task Force and Wildfire Council, is the jackstraw, where the old trees are coming down on top of each other, which makes for a very severe fuel package. So now that we know the 3 big things we're going to look for and what influences where a fire goes, what are they? Wind, topography, and a fuel package. Let's get a little more specific. There's different wind influences in different parts of the country. Here in Colorado, we see the Chinook winds, which generally come out of the west with a high and low pressure gradient, squeezes that wind over the top of the mountains, and the Front Range particularly just gets hammered from some of these Chinook winds. So a huge influence there. We've all heard of the Santa Ana winds or the Diablo winds in California. There's some other names, sundowner winds in California, and they all have local influences. So as an investigator, I talk to the locals and find out, what does the wind do? Thunderstorms are a nemesis for wildland firefighters because they will take the direction of a fire, and when that thunderstorm comes overhead, it'll actually turn that fire around and spread it in a completely different direction. So T-storms have a big effect on where that fire goes and on our safety. Temperature inversions. An inversion will slow down a wildfire, allow it to burn slowly but more intensely at times. A little bit of levity right here. I was fighting a fire at Happy Camp in California, and this is in Humboldt County. Do you know what the agricultural product is in Humboldt County? They sell it now legally in Colorado, weed. Well, we had a temperature inversion, and Happy Camp was a happy camp. We did run out of food, by the way, so we can have some fun at these things. And we'll talk about flying embers and how they affect and make my job a little more difficult as a fire investigator, with embers flying all over, starting secondary and tertiary fire. Let's get into the guts of this thing. Wind-driven fire. Wind is the #1 influence on where a wildfire is going to go. And that wind will create patterns on the ground and indicators, which I'm going to show here in a little bit. And it'll help us get to the origin of the fire. So this was taken out somewhere in Nevada, Utah, I forget which fire, they all blend together. But we take a look from early pictures of what direction that fire was going. I think it's very clear here. You can see this wind fire. I'm trying to use old school with a pointer stick here. Remember these? But this fire is getting blown from this direction further backward, and it will leave distinct patterns here in the ground, which we'll talk about and look at some really neat pictures. Some things that the wind will do that we have to watch out for, Canyons, winds act differently. In Summit, we know what the wind does. You know, in the morning, when it's warming up down in the lower parts of Summit County, and those of you that ride on the bike path like I do know when it heats up down low by Silverthorne Dillon, we get up canyon winds blowing it up to Copper, up toward Breck, sometimes a little bit up toward Montezuma. Then in the evening, when things cool down, the wind will blow down the canyons. So we know what some of the wind is doing. Saddles are dangerous. That's what helped kill our firefighters at Storm King Mountain. The fire ran right up to a saddle. Box canyons, not too many here in Summit, so we're lucky, but they're very dangerous. Narrow canyons, like Officers Gulch area worries me. Could a fire jump from one side of the interstate to the other? Absolutely. Look what happened at the coal seam fire in Glenwood Springs, where it's somewhat of a narrow canyon on the west side of Glenwood, where we had a fire jump the Colorado River, railroad tracks, a frontage road, and I-70. That is a pretty good fuel break. But narrow canyons with radiant heat and flying embers can certainly wreak havoc and make things more difficult for our investigation. I like this picture. This was down in Trinidad, Colorado in 2002. We were the first arriving mutual aid fire engine from Summit County. There was a small volunteer fire department there that did not feel comfortable engaging this. I was the first arriving incident commander and was told by the local fire chief, go up there and put it out. That's easier said than done. But if we look at what the terrain and the wind are doing, we have a synergistic effect. The wind's not only blowing the fire, in this case, to the south, but we also have a terrain influence. So did the fire start here? No. Did the fire start here? No. Did the fire more likely start somewhere in this area? Yes. So early pictures like this that we can get from witnesses, firefighters, media certainly help. Does this look familiar to anybody? Picture yourself in back of Summit High, 2005, I believe it is. The Beatles kills. Look what that fuel package did to fire growth. This was literally less than 30 minutes into the Ophir Mountain fire. And we can see, in this case, the cause was, we'll let you guess, but these seem to be power lines, and the fire did start down here. But you can see how the fuel package in the Ophir fire did have a significant influence. Another thing we look at when we're trying to get to the origin is a plume-dominated fire. This was a fire I was at between the New Mexico-Colorado border, looking at it, fortunately, from a safe distance. But this plume fire, which is creating its own fire weather, was just moving around almost like a tornado does, and air gets entrained from the bottom, gets up into this plume, and these embers will then travel several miles. It makes things more difficult for us as investigators because we have fires starting several miles from where the actual fire was. Little bit of a joke here. What is this? Hard economic times, right? So if you cannot afford a real fire or smoke detector at one of our local stores, just get some Jiffy Pop. We make a joke and call it a redneck smoke detector, but it works. If it gets hot enough and Jiffy Pop falls on your head, time to get out of bed and get out of the house. All right, let's get serious again. Please pay attention to this one slide because the rest have some relevance and all fall back to this. When we are talking about where a fire goes and what patterns it leaves in a wildfire, one, an advancing fire. That is where the fire is moving to, from point A to point B. What causes the fire to advance? Test question: wind, terrain, and fuel package. That will affect which direction this fire goes. An advancing fire will leave specific patterns or indicators on the ground, and we're going to show you some here in a little bit. A backing fire. Fires, wildland fires, they still will try to fight against the wind and or the topography somewhat. and it's not as intense. It's fighting the wind, it's fighting the topography, and we'll see different indicators on the ground. I'm going to show you some good pictures of this. I told you I'm a nerd on this, but you'll like it. But the fire can back against the wind. And a flanking fire, that's just the side of it. Generally, we're going to see a V shape on a fire. Show you a picture of that. And a flank is just the side. So advancing fire, backing against the wind, and then the flanks, the sides. Let's look at some pictures of this. This is in lovely Winnemucca. Have you guys ever been to Winnemucca? They needed to let this fire happen. Did I really say that? But in this case, the fire is advancing left to right. Look at this fire. It's pulling to the right side of the screen. This is going to leave some specific patterns, and I'll show you pictures of it here in a minute. As opposed to a backing fire, it's still advancing to the right side of this screen, but look at it. It's still fighting against the wind. There's still some fuel, and this is going to leave different patterns at the heel or the base of the fire, and they help us as investigators figure out where this fire started. Now, how do we start these things? How do we get from 30,000 acres down to something more manageable? Well, we define things by a general origin area. We'll talk about how to get into them. A specific origin area, that's a smaller workable area. Only after we can narrow these huge fires down, 30,000 acres, 1,000 acres, to something more manageable, like an acre, a half acre, or hopefully 10 feet by 10 feet, can we start to look for the cause. Here's an aerial picture of a fire I investigated. This was in Wisconsin. It went big, over 30,000 acres, but guess what? We got that 30,000 acres narrowed down to where it started. Look at this, from a news helicopter that was covering one story, flying home, and happened to catch this fire. So this made my job a lot easier. We had 30,000 acres. Early news footage got it narrowed down to 2 acres. So video cameras, eyewitnesses, a lot of things help us take this big picture, get it down to something smaller. We're going to look for macro or large-scale indicators. We interview people, news footage, those new Ring doorbells, drones. Everyone's got cameras on their cell phones and videos. So we use those tools to take a big fire and narrow it down to something more manageable. Take a look at this fire outside the Amarillo area, real garden spot. But again, if we look at a large-scale helicopter picture, the fire, it makes a V. Look at this. So this is all burned, everything up here. This is what's called the heel or the base of the fire. And this was the flank, the right flank, the left flank. The fire advanced in this north direction, and the origin was actually pinpointed at a power pole just above the heel of the fire. So the fire did back against the wind a little bit till the firefighters put it out, or it looks like it hit a road actually, and that's what stopped the backing on this fire. So overhead and drone photography helps us. Let's take this close to home. A lot of you have not seen this. First time. This is the Peak 2 fire. This is where that whole fire started. This is the Colorado Trail right here. We are looking from west to east approximately. This is downhill as we head down to the Peaks Trail. This fire did originate. This was the general origin area. Not going to get into the specifics because that case is still open, but we tape it off to preserve it and keep people out of it. And we did end up identifying the start of the fire right around here. I might have a few pictures on that. This is from the east side looking west at the Peak 2 fire. Again, this is our general origin area. We had to get this thing narrowed down to literally 2 feet by 2 feet until we found out where this thing started. So how did we figure out the general origin area on this? Smoke jumpers got in there when this fire was only 10 acres or less, and the jumpers were able to point out the fire was in this area and not 70 acres away. So that helped us, as well as looking at a lot of patterns, which we'll show you here in a second. We did collect some evidence from the Peak 2 fire. Again, it was human caused. We'll talk about that later on. Lots of evidence was up there, even in the middle of the woods, and it's collected. And that, again, that case is still open. We do mark evidence, just like you see on the TV shows, the cop shows, with evidence markers and flags, and we collect it in an appropriate manner. This particular piece of evidence was found right next to the Colorado Trail, about 2 feet away from the trail in the woods. The Buffalo Fire. Remember that? Again, the pictures help us identify an origin. Don't know what's going through this gentleman's head. Hopefully he did not live up there. But again, we can see the wind direction and the topography, which helps us identify where this Buffalo Fire started. This was also human-caused. Another close-up cool picture from the Buffalo Fire taken by one of our crews. And this tells me a lot. To you, it's looking like, oh, I see a bunch of trees on fire. But I am seeing an eddy effect. The wind is coming from, I can't show you depth on a camera, but from up in front of this, and is blowing kind of to the left or back into the screen, and it's wrapping the fire around the back of these trees, which is going to leave a specific pattern, which helps us determine that the fire didn't start way back here. It started somewhere closer to the right or the front where this picture was taken. Kind of a neat picture, but this helps me as an investigator. So now we got to take a general origin area, 2-3 acres that we've narrowed down, hopefully, into what we call a specific origin area. This is something that is workable. I like getting it down to 10 feet by 10 feet, something similar. And we use some flagging, which I'll get to later on. But this gets us to a manageable area. And once we get to a specific origin area, it is hands and knees. And we do a grid search, almost like you see them doing the cop shows on TV, and examine with a magnifying glass and a magnet and stuff, inch by inch with a magnifying glass. It's dirty. It's tedious, it's miserable work, and sometimes we come up with a dead end. This fire was up in the Pike National Forest, and we were able to identify a cause here. Now, we use some flags. You'll see them in some of the pictures. We use a red flag. I'm going backwards. We use a blue flag to show where the fire backed. All right, this is just to give us a picture in totality of where this fire is going. Yellow flags are for the flanks or the sides of the fire. Red flag where it advanced, and sometimes a white or green flag we'll use for evidence or the point of origin. This fire, Steve Lipsher took this. We had a fire up by the shooting range several years ago. Yes, they were trying to use this propane tank. Not a good idea for a target, but no, they don't blow up like they do on TV. But here you can see a lovely picture of me. I was having a really good time. But where the fire advanced, we're using red flags, putting down a yellow flag for a flank or a lateral pattern. So very tedious work. We'll look at these patterns here in a second. We're getting a little closer to where this fire started. We can see we had some advancing patterns going up this way. Here's where the fire, these blue flags were indicating where I saw patterns where it was fighting the terrain in the wind, and our point of origin was somewhere around here, and it was pulled back to a tracer round. Not a good idea here in Summit. Don't use them, please. This particular fire, you can see as we get closer and closer. This is from the grid search. We use twine, and we go literally 1 foot by 1 foot. Advancing is the red flags, sometimes flanking right in the middle where it shouldn't be, blue, but we did identify a cause on this particular fire. Again, this took hours to get to this part of the fire. Many people get involved. You can see a grid search going on right here, literally inch by inch, foot by foot, where we're looking for something that does not belong. All right, everything's meticulously mapped out, gridded, documented, GPS'd. Here's working with Jill Wick. She's our local Leo from the Forest Service, wonderful lady, and a gentleman who taught me a lot, Luke Conance, on the right. And this is at the Meadow Creek fire, which occurred by the Meadow Creek trailhead, 15 years ago. And we were able to start narrowing this down to a very good point of origin, but a lot of meticulous work, and it was a 3-part deal. So this is right here in our own backyard. We did find some evidence. It has to be collected in the appropriate manner using a shovel or a flat blade. Then we seal it with some saran wrap. So we preserve it. So if we have to show it to a jury or a defense attorney, we have preserved that evidence properly. But again, you can see the strings from a grid search. Some things we look at. I'm going to get a little nerdy here. I don't have the time in this to go over everyone in detail. But as fires burn, they will leave some protected areas. I'm going to walk over and get some evidence and show you some of these that we're looking at. I found this bone. I don't know to what, but this fire impacted this bone fragment. Right here, okay. I'm being told where to put this. I apologize. The fire impacted this from this direction, and this side was protected. So there is stuff on the ground that tells us what to look for. Let's look at another. A golf ball. This is out in Wildland, Colorado. A guy used his backyard as a driving range, but this shows very clearly the fire impacted this golf ball from one direction. This side is protected. Very good indicator of what direction that fire went. More to come. Let's go back to the slides. Some things, grass stems tell us a lot. They will cup or they will curl in the direction the fire pushed them. Sooting, staining, where the fire impacts a log or a rock. We will see some staining on the side the fire impacted it. Depth of char, I'll show you some pictures of that later on. Spalling, sometimes the fire, we saw this at the Keystone Gulch fire, very intense, hit a rock, and the air pockets in the rock caused it to start popping, or what we call spalling. That gave us an indicator of what direction that fire came from. We look at things like leaf curling. When the fire comes, it'll curl toward the heat or where the fire came from. White ash, I'll show you some pictures of that, and we'll talk about some V patterns. So lots of nerdy stuff. I find it fascinating. We look at these in totality. Here's a golf ball. That's the one I just showed you. This fire impacted it. It's very obvious from right to left, the left side of this top flight. That's still a good golf ball for me, the way I hit them. But this right here is protected, so it was very evident the fire came from the right to the left. Didn't affect the left side of this golf ball. Fantastic macro indicator. Let's take a look at this. This is what we call depth of char or beveling. What direction did the fire come from here? This side? I don't think so. Fire came from the right side and hit this fence post, power pole, whatever it was. Look how it just chewed away the mass. We've got deep depth of char, we've got beveling. So again, a very good macro indicator that showed the fire came from the right to the left. Evidence is all over the place. You just got to look for it. This one's going to mess with your heads. This was taken outside of Wildland, Kansas. You don't want to go there. But what direction did this fire come from? This is a trick. I got you on this one. Most people would say the fire came from the left to the right. No. This is called angle of char. Look at this. Hopefully the camera can pick that up. The fire actually came from the right to the left. It came in low in a wind event, and this created an eddy effect, like I showed you in those big trees about 10 slides ago, and just burnt up the backside of this tree. So to an untrained observer, they'd say, oh no, it came this way. Not true. This angle of char, the fire came in down low, hit these branches, but with the wind, these were protected. It just wrapped the fire around the back of the tree and up the backside. That's my trick slide for the day. All right, now that you know this, what direction did this fire come from? Let's talk about that angle of char and eddy effect. All right, to an untrained person, they say, oh no, it came from this direction. No, it didn't. Wind-driven fire. It came from the right, hit this pole, and then it wrapped it around, and like you saw with those trees from the Buffalo fire, went right up the backside. Kind of neat. As we do fire investigations for jury pictures or for evidence or for reports, we'll use arrows to show. Here an advancing indicator. Look at that beveling and that cupping right there. A backing fire, more subtle indications. This hit this particular can and caused sooting on one side. Not a lot of damage, not a lot of heat from a big tsunami effect, but again, a backing fire. I talked about curling leaves. Look at this. Leaves are curling. Indicator. We can tell this fire came from the right to the left. White ash. Fire came and hit the log in this direction. You can see nothing's burned. It almost backed right into this area. This was from Meadow Creek Fire in Frisco. Cupping or curling of the grass. This shows the fire came from the right to the left, and the grass just churned right toward it. This is called needle freeze. It's kind of subtle, but in a very strong fire, it will take those pine needles and actually freeze them in the direction that fire was going. This particular fire came from left to right. You can see some needle freeze. It's a little subtle, and I know you're looking at it on a camera, but we look for needle freeze, where it'll freeze those needles in a certain direction. Again, I like keeping things jury-proof, but you can see this log, depth of char, and degree of damage. This fire came from right to left on this macro indicator. Kind of an unusual picture. I was in the middle of Texas with not a lot of stuff to look at. I found a cow turd. Can I say that? I guess I'm saying it anyway. I found a patty on the ground. This was from a cow, but you can see this part of it got burned. This didn't. So sometimes you have to look at some unusual things. This was that piece of bone I showed you a little bit before. This fire came from the bottom left of the screen, impacted this piece of bone of whatever animal that was. So again, a very good indicator of what direction that fire came from. This is going to be tough for you, but how good are you guys? You're seeing a bunch of black stuff. This was pure luck, but this was I say it's skill. A little bit of luck, I'll call the skill. This was a 2,000-acre fire. If you look very closely, I don't know if the camera can pick these up, but these are matches. We were lucky on this that a size 14 boot didn't step on them or someone drove over them. But this is how specific we can get on a fire with a little bit of luck, a lot of skill, and a lot of time. But here is 3-4 matches that started this particular fire. What things do we have to rule out? I'll go through these real quickly. Smoking gets a bad rap. Cigarettes can and do cause fires, but the environmental conditions have to be just right. Over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, under 22 degrees, relative humidity, lots of nerdy stuff. But we look at the environmental factors. Lightning. I'm going to walk over and show you one piece of evidence. This is a fulgurite. That's today's big word. This was from a lightning strike, and it hit the ground, and actually you can see turned it to glass. We found this at a point of origin in a fire. So this was a fulgurite. Fascinating piece of evidence. Other things we look for fire cause. This was caused by refraction. This is those old insulator caps that were on some of the old power poles. The sun just hit this at the right angle, at the right time, and caused a fire. Fascinating. We found this right where the fire started. Another indicator to look at. I'm going to move through this before I run out of time. This vodka bottle. This is really good stuff, you guys. Plastic vodka bottle. But the fire, you can see, impacted it from this particular direction. This side is untouched. There is evidence out there. We just got to find it. Another piece of evidence, I'll hold this flat on my hand. It'll be hard to see. I'm holding it close to the camera. This is a piece of a catalytic converter. You can see the honeycomb appearance. They come out of a car well over 1,800 degrees if a catalytic converter has a problem. And fires can start about 450 Fahrenheit on dry grass. This can come out at well over 1,800. We found this during one of our interstate fires. So lots of good stuff out there to take a look at. Let's go back and finish up the PowerPoint. So we have to rule all of these things in or out as a cause. When we say a fire was human caused, that does not mean little Billy, or I'm picking on guys, but they start most of the fires. That doesn't mean little Billy went out and flicked a bic and started the fire. Human cause is everything but lightning or spontaneous combustion. 8 out of 10 wildfires are human caused. That doesn't mean arson. It can mean a careless campfire. And to dispel a rumor in Summit County, the Peak 2 fire was not started from a campfire. Lightning is a natural cause. Debris burning, if we have a slash pile that got out of control. Arson, bad. We want to catch you and we'll give you a home in the Crossbar Hotel in Breck. Equipment use, excuse me, that's friction, where a mechanical device caused a spark. Railroads cause fires. We got metal wheels and metal tracks and diesel engines shooting out carbon particles. Holdover fires, a fire we think is out. Remember, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, the fire is not out till it's dead out. Structure fires can cause the woods to catch on fire. The kids play with matches. We hope not. We're doing a good job, but some still do. Power lines have been a frequent flyer here in Summit County. Fireworks used improperly and unprofessionally can cause fires. Cutting, welding, sparks, firearms, we've seen that at our shooting range. Blasting, I showed you the glass magnification, and occasionally spontaneous combustion. So lots we have to look at on this. Here is a picture of wire-to-wire impact right over where a fire started. The power company disputed it. We got the line, actually showed the splatter marks. Aluminum comes off at 1220 degrees. The fire ignites at about 450 Fahrenheit, so we can do the math. Another of some line abrasion that we take a look at. We can then take these lines, set them to a metallurgist, someone way smarter than me, and they can find one piece of metal inside another. It's geeky stuff, but this is what we have to do sometimes. Found this after a meticulous search. I don't know what arsonist would flick a bic and then leave the lighter right where they started it, but I like dumb arsonists because we can catch them. No fingerprints, unfortunately. This was kind of daunting. This wasn't Summit County. I won't get into detail. These are all matches. And law enforcement believes someone was doing something to cook a drug, particularly methamphetamines. And this was right here in Summit County. So all those tiny things were literally thousands of matches. This is an incendiary device. This is from Louisiana. They're very innovative down here, a time delay device, but you light the matches. This is that fire starter stuff you can buy at some stores, Walmart's, Target's, and then some more underneath, and it is a nice time delay. And this was one that didn't work. I kind of like that. Car fires can start the trees on fire. Did this start the wildfire? Did the wildfire burn the car? Here it was very evident that the car started the fire first. It started in the passenger compartment. This was an arson job in a car, and we can just tell from that pattern on the car, and that's what started the woods on fire. Here's another lucky one. Use your eyes, but right here and right here, 2 matches. A lot of work went into this, but how nice is that to find the cause of a fire? When they get to build this hot, they leave different patterns. It's scary, but I just thought it was a cool picture to put in here. Other causes of fire. This was actually up north by the Heaney area. Bird nests. Big birds, big nests. The bird can sit on a power line, it's fine, but when the nest gets too big and it creates an arc from phase to neutral or line to line, then we have a problem and sometimes a dead bird. We'll see a pole top fire. And it'll burn the top of the pole, but what happens, stuff drops down to the bottom and we have a fire cause. So can't control the birds up there. I'm going to wrap this thing up with a case study here. Fascinating. This was in the Panhandle area of Texas. Pay attention to the detail. We're getting near the end, but it just shows why we need to do a good investigation. This fire obviously started from energized power lines on the ground. No brainer, right? No brainer. look at this building right here, this outbuilding. It was insured by an insurance company. We won't get into certain names. The insurance company was salivating over this. They wanted to subrogate, meaning get money from the power company because their lines came down. And everyone was focused on these lines and what they did. But again, pay attention. What's missing on top of that building? Part of it's a roof. Let's come to this. So while many investigators were looking at this, I'd like to say I was smart enough to look around, and this took half a day, but then I started putting the pieces together. This is where that power line you saw on the ground impacted a cattle fence, which is about a half an acre. It hit this cattle fence, boy, it lit it up, energized that cattle fence. We know the fire started right there. We know the fire started right at that cattle fence. So did the lines do it? Of course. But what was the cause of the cause? I kind of made that term up, but I like it. This is part of that roof that blew off that shed. Look at this. Singe marks. That roof blew off the shed. Excuse me. Blew off the shed, hit the power lines, caused the power lines to come down, hit the cattle guard, which started the fire. So it just means we need to look at things in totality on these fires and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together like I showed you in slide number 2. It's not black and white. We can't solve these in 45 minutes like the crime shows do on TV. We've got great people out there doing a lot of great work. I'm proud of our firefighters here in Summit County, in the state, and across the country. They're a brave bunch, a good bunch, and they're hardworking, and I'm hoping for a safe summer here. So I'd like to wrap things up. I can ask you for questions, but email me if you have any questions. Berino, J-B-E-R-I-N-O, @summitfire.org. I took this picture. This is at a fire in Dot Cerro. I thought I was being, right down the interstate, I thought I was being cool with this picture. This thing's coming at me at over 400 miles an hour, and slurry weighs almost 9 pounds per gallon. It hit me, knocked me on my butt, and I was finding slurry in body parts that I didn't know I had for days. But I welcome any questions by email, jberino@summitfire.org. Thanks for your attention, and let's hope for a safe summer. Thank you very much.